incredibly passionate about, but it's also something that we could do much better. So kicking things off, why supply chains can't ignore UBOs anymore, ultimate beneficial owners. To the kind of, I suppose, the point, the very starting point, which most people will be probably asking, why is UBO verification central to supply risk management, especially with ESG, environmental and social and governance and AML pressures?
All right. So thank you so very much, Una, for explaining all of that. So first of all, we all know that regulators are putting much more emphasis on understanding who really owns and controls the entities we deal with, right? But the truth is, UBOs often remain unhidden, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. I will try to unpack all of that today. Why they're so difficult to uncover, how are the registry APIs combined with KYB solutions are starting to change the game finally, right? So the first part that I would really like to explain, first of all, is the bigger question, that is, why do UBOs or ultimate beneficial owners remain hidden in the first place, right? So there are the very few key reasons that would I like to lay down. First of all, the first and very major reason for the UBOs to stay hidden is the complex corporate structures. Let's just think about it. The shell companies and the holding structures, which are stretched across multiple jurisdictions, right? So, for example, a company in London is owned by a firm in Cyprus, and which is in turn owned by another British Virgin Islands firm, right? So by the time that you get to the end of that chain, you've completely lost the visibility who the actual person in control is, right? So the complex corporate structures are one of the very key reasons that the UBOs remain hidden and that we are unable to get the visibility on all of them, right? The second, I think the major reason why UBOs stay hidden are the jurisdictional loopholes, right? So every country, like you said, have different set of rules. Some make registries public, other restrict accesses, some don't even require disclosure at all. So criminals know this and exploit it, and they pick the weakest link in the chain, right, to commit fraud or to commit money laundering. The third and the key reason would be nominee directors and shareholders. So often, what you will see is that the women or the men that are appointed to just mask the true controllers, the true owners. So on paper, it looks legit, but in reality, the beneficial owner is someone that is completely different from what's mentioned on the papers, right? I think the data inconsistencies when it comes to the registries is also one of the key reasons, because it's so fragmented, it's so outdated, and it's very formatted differently, right?
Yep.
Thirdly, the data is, for example, not automated in a way. Like, for example, the compliance officers reach out to a particular registry, try to take out the information, but maybe after another day or 2 days, something changed up and they wouldn't know it until they get another report in the next quarter. So the data inconsistency is one of the very main reasons for all the blind spots that we end up in when it comes to the ownership trails and everything. So yeah, I think these are one of the very key reasons why the UBOs retain hidden, and all of these reasons combined make UBOs transparency one of the very toughest challenges in the compliance industry.
Absolutely. And if we just kind of go back to basics, obviously we've mentioned here about we talked about the 7 pillars, and we've jumped into supply chain. But if we, and again, there's some of the questions that we get through is, well, what's the difference between distribution channels and service channels? And if you don't mind, I might just take a second to explain that for our listeners. Distribution channels is how services reach our customers. So direct face-to-face channels, digital onboarding, intermediaries, or agent networks. So there's different ways in which services and products can be provided. And that's the distribution channels. Service channels are, once a client is onboarded, it's the way in which client uses our services that can create risk. So for example, online banking, mobile apps, correspondent banking, OTC desks, they all differ in their transaction velocity, traceability, and ownership and control challenges. So once we onboard customers, we need to be very, very clear and understand how indeed we are servicing our clients and the way in which they're using our services. So that's just to differentiate between distribution channels and service channels. But yes, sorry, Isha, that was a fantastic response to the question. So thank you very, very much in that. Taking it to the kind of like the next step as well. Obviously, there's a lot of regulatory pressure around this. And the challenge we're seeing nowadays is sanction exposure is not direct exposure. Honestly, in fact, I was doing a podcast last week together with AML Watcher, Transform Finance and Raw Compliance at the event in Frankfurt, and we had the absolute pleasure of interviewing Dr. Hans, who's a member of the German government overseeing counterterrorism. And one of the things he said was, people who are on sanction lists don't open accounts. They don't. It's pretty black and white. The sanction lists are out there. We have access to them. The illicit actors have access to them. The minute a name or an entity or indeed a shipping vessel or any type of legal structure or entity goes on that list, we know that for all intentional purposes, plan B, C, D will be instigated in terms of the next avenue for moving those illicit funds and monies. But the opaque ownership structure in the likes of shell companies, unfortunately, and trust structures, is something which I've worked with a lot over the years, creates a lot of secondary exposure and amplifies the risk. So would you like to maybe talk about the ways in which opaque ownership, if I can speak today, would you like to talk to us about the ways in which opaque ownership structures amplify the risk of sanction breaches across supply chain networks?
All right. So first of all, the good news is that the technology, specifically registry APIs, is starting to change this picture. So what's happening right now within the KYB, as well in many other KYB providers, we are now getting the direct access to the registries through APIs, right? So the APIs connect compliance streams direct into the official corporate databases, and they're able to pulling the data in real-time updates. That means that if the ownership changes tomorrow, you don't have to wait for a quarterly report and you see it instantly, right? So the direct access to the registries through APIs is one of the very first steps that we have taken forward to make sure that there are no multiple challenges that the compliance teams have to face, considering it's a shell company and considering it's a publicly listed company, right? So the APIs that we have now developed with the different public registries based on different jurisdictions, that was not an easy task to done, but it has been done constantly in different KYB solutions. Right. The second one is the cross-border connectivity is one of the very major reasons that we are unable to find out who is the real you behind a company, right? So instead of checking for 10 different registries manually, the APIs aggregate data from multiple jurisdictions into a single dashboard. So that's a game changer for global businesses. Now you do not need to worry that, okay, my compliance officers will have to go to 10 different registries, search out 10 different companies, trying to find out who is the real owner of that particular company. Yep. So that has really helped changing the game for the global businesses. So yeah, I think the APIs make sense of messy and inconsistent registry data formats, different languages, different currencies, all converted into standardized structures that reveals hidden linkages. One of the major reasons I think it's very important is because the scale of the automation that we have done in this place, right? So the manual checks, for example, a company who want to verify 5 to 10 companies can develop, their compliance team. They can do the manual checks for 5 companies. But when you are scaling your business and you need to verify thousands of businesses and millions of businesses, you cannot do that manually, right? So the APIs and the automated KYB solution that we're having right now allow institutions to scale their compliance without burning our teams or budgets, right? Yeah. So that's the thing, that integration with the risk engine, like you were talking about, the registries APIs don't just tell you the UBOs. So what happens is that different solutions are offering the services that these UBOs would then be screened against sanctions and PEP screenings, and they tell you if the person is high risk, and that's where the compliance becomes fully, I'd say, proactive.
But I think it's also fair to say, and you hit the nail on the head there with and again, I use the word fragmentation. We see across the globe different approaches on corporate registries. And in fact, we spoke even to this yesterday on day one about the challenges. Indonesia, again, is a perfect example where the corporate registry is maintained by state as opposed to a centralized country register. And I mentioned yesterday, I was involved in a report a few years ago with Bank for International Settlements on the need for LEIs, legal entity identifiers, that would hopefully remove some of this fragmentation. But one of the things that we're beginning to see more and more of today, which is obviously an increasing challenge, is game disclosure rules. And what I mean by game disclosure rules is even when registries exist, companies are actually hiding ownership below reporting thresholds. And as we know, depending on your jurisdiction, if your client is a medium or low risk client, you're looking at normally a 25% ownership threshold. If they're high risk, or they identify as potentially high risk, that's brought down to 10%. And so there is that kind of UBO identification, fragmentation across regulators, which to be fair has harmonized to a much bigger degree over the past number of years than it did, say, back in 2016, 2017, where there still continued to be a lot of fragmentation. But unfortunately, I think the truth is there is no foolproof solution to this because of the opaqueness of the layers of shell companies, trusts, and nominee shareholders. It is something that we can employ technology, and we do employ much better technology and data, but there will always, our business is based on risk. There will always be risk in the provision of services that we provide and in our service channels. But it's really understanding and that explainability, being able to explain to a regulator how well you've understood the client and how the client is using your products and services and how those are being provided to them through the various service channels that you provide. And on that note, obviously, I would really love to talk about sector-specific UBO risks. Industries such as manufacturing, technology, energy, especially in the context of cross-border suppliers and also global supply chain complexity. So would you maybe like to talk a little bit to that about the kind of the multi-tiered kind of challenges we have within that, and maybe give a little bit more information to our attendees today on where those real challenges are in sector-specific UBO exposure.
All right. So first of all, I completely agree with the part of the fragmented registry data. I think we face it very much in every jurisdiction, specifically like in Indonesia. Other than that, all of the US states, we have more than 10 to 15 registries covering every state. So to compile all of data into a single place is very difficult, right? And to give the customer or the end business a right approach towards the risk assessment is also very difficult, right? So this is something that we really need to work on, that we're trying every single day. But when you're getting multiple businesses from multiple, let's say, jurisdictions and multiple registries, it gets really hard for the end business to try and figure out what's the right person and what's the right UBO behind all of that. Now, secondly, you mentioned about the manufacturer or different industry level UBO risk. That's completely right. I think the structures and the layers that we have into the UBO ownership and identification is something that's really bothersome at some point, because you can try to create different rules for different industries, but there should be a single unanimous I'd say a set of rules for the UBO identification that would really help the industries in the lower scale to comply with that. So that's my thoughts on the different industry wise, because Mainly in our line of business, we did not come across such use cases in which people are looking for different, I'd say, UBO identification methods. They're just looking for the UBOs, like you said, mentioning covering 75% of the 75% of the ownership structure, because according to their set regulated rules, this is something that is high risk for them. So every jurisdiction have different set of rules. So one thing that we can do in this way is to customize their risk scoring engines or risk assessment engines, right? So you cannot customize the entire solution according to that, but you can give individual businesses an option to customize what is high risk for them and what is low risk for them, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that would really help in that particular case.
As a having been in the industry 20 plus years, and having been an in-house practitioner and an MLRO and head of compliance legal during that period of time, I'm very attuned to the day-to-day real life challenges that we face. And, the biggest challenge that we have is at a first tier level, it may look clean. But unfortunately, it's in some instances, it could be a fourth tier subcontractor who's linked to sanctioned individuals or PEPs or high risk entities. And tracing beneficial ownership across these tiers it's not just resource intensive. It's not even about the resources. It's actually at times outside the scope of what the procurement or indeed compliance teams can actually manage day to day. Without us kind of over engineering the process. And whilst I have seen regulators attempt to try and put in place rules that are really practical, the truth is, in day-to-day compliance, this is a very, very difficult challenge. And I mentioned regulation earlier, that there is no global standard, which means that multinational companies do face patchwork compliance in understanding different threshold and disclosure requirements. I mentioned the 10%, 25%. In some instances, it's controlling influence, like which individuals have controlling influence. And that sometimes, especially within trust structures, can be very challenging as to who actually is the originator and who's behind the trust. And until the actual event for the trust activation occurs, where do the assets sit? So again, I could see the day-to-day challenges, and obviously that's why there is such a significant reliance on third-party disclosure and getting suppliers to and entities to self-disclose, but why technology is so important. So what misconceptions do you think that businesses often have about UBO compliance and third-party due diligence? And how do these myths increase exposure?
All right. So yeah, I second the part that you mentioned. The first misconception about it is that different, I'd say, jurisdictions have different set of rules for identifying the UBOs, right? So if it's a small scale business, they would come up to us and they would say that they just want to see if the individual has 75% ownership. If that individual is clean, we're good to go with the business. And like you mentioned, if you dive deeper into it, maybe the originator who's actually UBO is a sanctioned individual or maybe a sanctioned identity, or the first person that they just had a look at was just a nominee director or nominee UBO. So this is one of the very first misconceptions, that people think that the first or the person holding the most amount of shares is the actual UBO of that particular company, right? So this creates a lot of issues further down in the line of businesses when they actually do business with that particular entity and they end up being a fraud or sanctioned identity, right? So this is one of the very major issue that we come across when it comes to the UBO identification.
Perfect. Thank you so much indeed. And I think it also be important that we talked about criminal exploitation already, how these weaknesses are exploited, for the laundering of money, moving of illicit goods through opaque supplier networks. I actually yesterday watched a fantastic, it's a very UK thing, but a Panorama episode last night about drug smuggling from South America from Latam into Europe via Ireland. And what the Garda, what the European Drug Enforcement team are doing around that. And it actually gave a perfect example about this in terms of opaque structures, where the drug, basically the cartels had purchased a cargo ship. And that cargo ship had been purchased for 10 million euros. And that cargo ship was then packed full with cocaine. And then that ship was then basically brought from South America over towards Ireland. And there was various reasons for that in terms of resource manpower to intercept the drug, the ship, the cargo ship, and detection. And they were obviously talking about jurisdictional differences as well. But then there also had been a fishing trawler purchased where individuals were then going out with the fishing trawler to the cargo ship in order to basically offload some of the cargo at that point. And this is where kind of that supply chain opaque networks. In this network, it involved, individuals in LATAM, it involved individuals in the UK, individuals in Ireland, and with actually the main orchestrator sitting out of the UAE. So it was incredible. It really did break down the opaqueness in the structures. So again, I'm really, really interested. If anybody gets an opportunity to watch that, it will actually show you really clearly how you need to really look beneath who's behind the purchase of different legal vehicles, and try to understand the rationale. So in this instance, the trigger point for the investigation was that the fishing trawler was actually purchased by a building company out of the UAE, which makes no sense whatsoever on paper. And that was the red flag. However, and obviously then they're trying to look through to understand, well, who is the UBO behind this? What could the potential connection be? What would be the rationale for this? And obviously all these purchases had to go through banking entities as well. So it just begins to show you about why we need to understand our clients and the activities they're involved in, but also what they're using our service channels for. And in this instance, it was the purchase of a fishing trawler by a building construction company, which, on paper makes no sense. So again, I just wanted to talk about that because this is the level of due diligence that we need to be doing. However, based on previous based on previous kind of technology and risk function capabilities that we had, a lot of times, many of these kind of identification processes went unidentified because, for example, in construction, there is very large volumes of cash flowing through that business day in, day out. So a 300,000 euro purchase doesn't and wouldn't raise alarm bells with a construction company, but yet it was the actual product that was being purchased which was the alarm bell. And then obviously it makes you want to look back into the structure. Sorry, it was an incredibly interesting panorama episode. You can see what I do with my spare time.
Yes.
So we've talked about, please go ahead.
I would just like to add a very small point into what you already said, is because I think this is one of the major challenges that supply chain industry face, along with the e-commerce industry, right? So the companies are the main vendors or merchants. They're listing thousands of products on the official website, right? And if the owner of that particular e-commerce platform is unable to find out who is the true beneficial owner of every single business, the same instances that you just mentioned are supposed to happen very often, right? So I think this is one of the very major, I think, the problem that you've just discussed.
Yep. And I could tell you, as I said, in my career, I've worked in investment banking, wholesale banking, wealth management, and also private banking. And I'll be honest, the biggest challenge at times is actually in the private banking space with trust structures or foundations. And as we know, a lot of NGOs actually do use, well, a lot of terrorist organizations have been known for using NGOs as conduits for fundraising. And you're having to really look through the structures to understand who's behind them. And it is very challenging and time consuming. And so that's why obviously technology plays a massive role here. So if we move on to kind of part 2 of our discussion, and I'm really proud to say that we're keeping time. We've got 3 parts. So let's quickly get through part 2. The hidden layer, the challenge in UBO identification. So why is it so difficult to identify UBOs in offshore, multi-layered or nominee-based structures?
All right. So yeah, like I already mentioned, why is it so hard to identify UBOs is because of the multi-jurisdiction connectivity issues, right? So like I told you, for example, if a firm that is registered in US, right, or maybe in UK, now if the other business is doing business with that particular firm, he would just look into that particular business in UK, try to figure out if that company has been sanctioned in UK, has been, if the UBO has been sanctioned in any global registries and stuff, and see. But what they don't understand is that there are different layers to the UBOs. So I think there is a major part that we miss over here is to check on the multi-layer level, multi-jurisdiction level, right? So that's where the global coverage comes in. A lot of the solutions, a lot of the technologies are not offering that, right? They do not look beyond a specific jurisdiction. So if you come to a particular solution, if a business is trying to verify a particular business, they would just do it to the one registry where that business is registered in. What they don't understand is that the UBOs are way more deeper than that particular registry, right? So I think that's why it's one of the major reasons that we're not able to do it, because the registry data is still not automated. It's still pretty much manual. It's completely impossible for the compliance analyst to look into the 190 plus registries around the globe and try to figure out where is that UBO lying behind, right? So I think one of the major reasons would be this process pretty much being still manual, right? And pretty much being refined to a particular jurisdiction where that company is registered in.
Absolutely. So I think we have, actually, to be honest, I think we've talked a lot about shell companies and front entities obscuring ownership. I think we've kind of gone through a lot of this. Actually, this is a very good question. How can discrepancies between registered company activity and actual operations signal hidden UBO risks? And I think that's exactly to the point that I raised there on the really great example on the Panorama episode last night between a building company purchasing a fishing trawler on the western coast of Ireland. And these discrepancies, when you speak about them out loud, are pretty straight. They sound pretty straightforward. But why is it so difficult to identify these discrepancies day to day? And how important is it for us to really understand our clients and the activities they undertake in order to better help us understand whether or not the information we have on the company is accurate?
Exactly. So one of the very major reasons that I think is the data that we are, for example, if the process that a company is following to identify any particular UBO or any information when it comes to a business, could be any document. The thing is that they have different compliance analysts that are working for them, right? So the entire compliance team goes to a particular registry, try to fetch out information, and that's that. Right. So there is no particular updates that they are getting when once they're done searching the particular entity. Right. So I think one of the major data is the data inconsistencies. There are different languages. The data in the registries, it's not particularly in one language. There are different formats that the compliance teams are not able to get through. And the different data inconsistencies, and then the data freshness is one of the very major and key reasons. The data in the registries is very outdated. There are different registries which do not update it at all. There are some registries that are updating it every single day, right? So I think that the issue comes behind at the end of the registries as well. How soon are they updating the data? What is the data quality that they are asking the businesses to put in? if all of that is covered at the registry level, because a normal or layman only have access to the public registries, but they can try to verify the data. If the data at the registry end is not updated enough or not complex enough, there is literally no way possible for the layman or a compliance analyst or probability solution to get the data in a better format.
Yeah. And I think as well, it's important to note as well that we are seeing a rapid churn of disposable entities. And that's something, especially in the new era of fraud that we're seeing, romance scams. I don't like to use the term of pig butchering scams, investment scams. If you actually look at the entities involved, those entities, they spin up and shut down in a very, very rapid period of time. Generally, they're only operational for a period of 12 to maximum 16 months before their kind of 18 months obligation for accounting and reporting becomes due. So that is one of the biggest challenges we have with kind of shell companies and front entities, is that those front entities are actually being disposed of very quickly because there is a plan B, C, D, E, F all already in place to move to the next step to avoid detection. And when they are detected, remember that losses in money laundering are expected by illicit actors. So again, they're going to move as quickly as they can to plan B, plan C. I think as well, one of the things that I would like to speak to as well, we talked about the limits of public registries, and we talked about the kind of the divergence of beneficial ownership. But one thing we haven't spoken to as yet, and I think we've got about 20 minutes left, is UBO verification in fintechs, including crypto firms. Now, this is something which regulators themselves have openly, and I'm not going to name names, but I think we all know who we're talking about. Regulators have openly discussed this in respect of approval of certain crypto and fintech platforms, saying, well, look, we can't fully understand or verify your UBO transparency. Therefore, we are going to reject your authorization application. And we've seen the UK FCA come out with that. We've seen the DNB, the regulator in the Netherlands, come out with that, South Africa and Australia. So this isn't just one standalone regulator with a kind of a grudge. This is becoming a global challenge. So could you maybe talk about, can we talk about that in detail? So I think first and foremost, what are the challenges when trying to verify the ownership structure of entities across jurisdictions and shell companies within crypto ecosystems?
All right. So what happens is that a lot of the businesses, what they do is that once they are done their research on the UBOs, one of the key factors in deciding that risk assessment for that particular business is there AML risk? Is there transaction monitoring risk? Is there sanction screening risk and all of that associated? If the respected UBO has been sanctioned across the globe, if the respected UBO has been in any of the adverse media list, in any of the sanction list, criminal record list, regulatory enforcement, and all of that. So I think how we are coping with it and how a lot of the solutions are coping with it right now is right after you're done with the UBO identification, in case that you are successful at identifying the UBO, 75% of shares or maybe 25%. The next step should always be screening those particular UBOs. I think probably all of them you should do that across different sanctions lists, right? So across UN sanctions lists, across global sanctions lists, and see if those particular UBOs are not just sanctioned in your particular registry or country, but maybe if they're sanctioned globally, right? Maybe if the UBO is a company, then maybe if they're bankrupt or not, something like that. So all of these checks should be done very effective immediately right after the UBO identification to figure out if the UBO is a clean person or not. So I think especially at the KYB, what we do is that right after the UBO are identified, we automatically run an AML screening checks on all of the UBOs. This will give a very clear picture if that particular UBO has been in any of the sanctions list, adverse media list, and if it is in probability list and all of that. And that gives you a very clear picture to see the UBO that you guys are going to be working with the clean UBO or not.
Yeah. And I think it's important as well to mention regulatory arbitrage here. What we have seen is entities structuring themselves across kind of light touch VASP regimes to minimize disclosure. And that is, again, that comes back to the fragmentation. I wouldn't even say fragmentation. We're still in the early stages of crypto regulation adoption. And that's very fair to say. I mean, it has not yet been harmonized to any extent. So we do actually see regulatory arbitrage. And again, that's why where we see entities operating across multiple jurisdictions that we know have lesser disclosure requirements, we do obviously need to look at those in more detail. And obviously there is their intermediate risk. Liquidity is routed via kind of brokers and OTC desks to obscure the end beneficiaries. So that's something, again, that we're very, very mindful of, specifically within the crypto space. Cross-border registry access, we talked about that, and how KYB platforms can bridge this gap. You've kind of gone into quite a lot of detail about that it really provides a much higher match precision and lower false negatives, and of course, an audible trail for regulators. But how can we scale UBO verification without, I suppose, crippling the user experience? And that's something that we honestly, that UX is something that we really struggle with in TradeFi alone. I have seen some onboarding processes for corporate entities taking up to 3 months because of basically sequential onboarding steps to comply with both regulatory and audit findings and new processes and controls put in, and then the whole thing becomes exasperated. So how do we scale UBO verification without creating onboarding friction and delaying transfers and ultimately impacting the user experience?
All right. So what we're typically doing at the KYB is that we have cross-border registries access, right? So we have the API integration available for all the registries throughout the globe. Once you come into the platform, you put in a name of a particular company that you want to verify, or the UBO identification you need for a particular company. The APIs then go to every jurisdiction and try to find out a match for that particular registry, right? Once that comes in, we are able to give you, instead of giving you multiple cards of every jurisdiction, we try to fetch out all the relevant data that we think is important for you, and try to put it out in a single report for you to go through it. That would take a lot less time for you to do it manually, going to different registries and trying to find a different data, different UBOs. Once you have that in a particular format in a file, it's easy for you or your compliance team at your end to review it. If you give us the responsibility to give the risk score or risk assessment to a particular UBO or a particular company, we can do it at our end as well. But I think if you get a consolidated report, it gets a lot easier for you to make a decision and do the onboarding faster. Instead of you getting multiple reports, you have to go to multiple data, and that would definitely increase the process time and everything, and it's going to create frictions in your onboarding process.
And talking about that reporting, that kind of, and then if we look towards kind of multi-layered legal graphs or on-chain, off-chain linkages, how can technology such as graph databases or real-time registry APIs really essentially improve the tracking for legal entity linkages in crypto transactions?
So sorry, when your voice is breaking up, can you come again?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, I can hear you
now. Technology. Obviously, graph databases to provide that kind of multi-layered legal graphs, and on-chain, off-chain linkages, and real-time APIs to pull fresh filings, and to reconcile kind of KYT, know your transaction alerts. How are technologies really supporting this in the crypto space? Like, what are we seeing at the moment?
All right. So one of the things that I think could be a major development in this area particularly would be having different sort of reg tech solutions under a single scalable platform, right? So what happens is that, for example, if you're trying to verify a UBO or a business, a lot of businesses at the moment have different particular solutions that they're using. For example, they're using a different solution for transaction monitoring. They're using a different solution for KYB. They're using a different solution for AML screening. That definitely increases a lot of time. It's not easy to integrate every solution with the other solution, and I think that's one of the major reasons that it creates issues in consolidating all of the data and try to review and verify it and give the UBU verification. I think if we are able to provide a step-by-step KYC onboarding flow, in which we are able to do all of that under a single platform, that will really reduce the time. It will be cost efficient, time efficient as well, and it will give you a very consolidated data at the end of it, so you wouldn't have to review multiple data. So I think it's a very important thing.
Yeah, and I think as well, we mentioned KYT, Know Your Transaction, and KYB Fusion. That is, and again, it's not just in the crypto context. This is a 101 for all organizations. It's about behavior analytics. It is, are the transactions on the customer side aligning with the understanding of our clients' known activity? And that example I gave on the fishing trawler being purchased by the building company is a perfect example in that regard. And this then nicely brings me on to everybody's favorite discussion point, the travel rule. So obviously, private set intersection, PSI for travel rule exchange, if we can use this to preserve privacy while verifying counterparty identity, it's going to be key. So now I look at the benefits of the travel rule. Let's throw out the window all of the, I'll be honest, bloody headaches we've been having for implementation, sunrise rule, etc., or sunset rule, should I say? I prefer to say sunrise. It just makes it more positive. But what does a compliant, future-ready travel rule verification flow look like post 2025? And it would be really great to get your opinion on this, about how, profiling, what we could more do with future-ready travel rule compliant workflows.
All right, so I think it's one of the key developments that we think should be happening in 2025, because depending upon the cross-border transactions, having a travel rule compliance is pretty important while making all the decisions, right? To flag any particular transactions, to try and find out if they align with the other data that we have in place. It's very important, like I already mentioned, the compliance, there should be a standard. There should be a particular one-stop shop for everything, right? There shouldn't be multiple things happening at multiple ends. That's where the discrepancies happen. So if we're able to consolidate all of the compliance process under a single tree, which is very hard at the moment, it's not easy to do it, but I think in the future we're able to take out all of these compliance processes and consolidate them and try to make decision under a single scalable platform. That would be really helpful instead of making different decisions for different transaction-based risk, different KYB-based risk, AML-based risk. So all of that should be done under a single primary scalable solution.
Absolutely. And we need UBO aware routing. If a counterparty or UBO control hits red flags, we need to be able to block or redirect the flows, or indeed have conditional release upon post-settlement review, for example, with medium risk. Whereas if it's high risk, obviously that would be a different approach. And obviously, event-driven monitoring, where we're continuously watching for ownership changes, and wallet risk scoring and cross-venue exposures, and last but not least, audibility and explainability. Everybody's favorite. We need to be able, in the crypto space, you really, really need to be able to explain your risk scoring application to the regulators and actually have regulator-ready evidence packs to support those. And that's going to be something, a bit of a game changer that we're really going to begin to see as crypto regulation develops as well. One of the key reasons being because of the speed of transactions, I actually think we're going to see a lot more pull reporting from regulators as opposed to push, i.e. that the regulators actually do have a direct API into regulated institutions to pull data so that there is that regulator-ready, instantaneous evidencing for certain parts of these transactions. So, Esha, we're nearly out of time. We've got 5 more minutes. So, one of the things that as we've been going through this, that I've really enjoyed talking about was kind of thinking to myself about an implementation playbook for improved UBO verification for supply chain due diligence. And I think, as you've rightly said, I don't think, but no, technology plays a massive, massive role in this. And there are challenges with interoperability, terms and travel rule gateways, PSI and standards. But obviously that's something that we're going to have to address as we move along. And it's an expectation with any new development in regulation or a regulated area. In terms of matrices and kind of common pitfalls to avoid, in terms of reducing false negatives, is there any kind of advice that you would like to provide in this regard on kind of UBO verification? Like how can firms really begin to reduce the false negatives in their reviews?
All right. So I feel like we need a system, a technology that can bridge the gap between fragmented registries data and the compliance operations that we have. So what happens is that there should be a platform that would be able to connect dots, that should automate ownership mapping, provide an ongoing monitoring layer. So you're not just compliant at onboarding, but continuously protected against the hidden ownership risks that are to come in case. The reduced friction for compliance teams, maybe a cost-efficient solution to cut down the manual work is very much important. So there should be a technology that should cover all of those aspects, bring transparency into the business ecosystems, and in other words, I'd say take a messy global problem and just make it manageable, right? So there should be a technology that's doing that. So if I zoom out, the bigger picture here is the UBO transparency is not just about checking a regulatory box, right? So it's about protecting the financial system from abuse, safeguarding businesses from reputational harm, and just build trust with customers and regulators, right? So we all know that the fraudsters and money launderers will always try to hide it. But the connected registries, maybe APIs and different KYB solutions, they can work hand in hand and finally shift the reactive compliance into a proactive transparency.
Absolutely.
So so my takeaway from all of this today is that uncovering UBOs is a burden, we know, but it's a competitive advantage. The organizations that are embracing it now are not just compliant; they are actually fully ready to combat with any risks that are to come forward.
Absolutely, and you hit the nail on the head, Esha, if I may say. Never ever treat UBO as a one-off, as a UBO identification as a one-off, exercise. It needs to be a life cycle control, which needs to be combined with your ongoing transaction monitoring, because it's only, and you said this, it's continuous. We only really know who is behind and how the account is operating through ongoing intelligent monitoring of the account's activities and how they're using products and services and how they're transacting with third parties and the volumes of those transactions as well. So as you rightly said, this is not a one-off exercise. This must be continuous in order for it to work. And again, I think one of the biggest things where organizations really fail here is failing to document rationale for thresholds and exceptions. So where you have made decisions in respect of UBO identification, where you have, decided, oh, look, well, there's a 24% ownership structure here, but we're only legally required to do 25. So, is that sufficient? Does, as a compliance officer, you need to rely on your sixth sense at times. And sometimes it's like, actually, what, I should look, whilst if it's a medium or low risk, I'm technically not required to, I'm going to look into that 24% because there's just something that doesn't feel, and that's where that game playing on thresholds comes into play. So document rationale, document thresholds that you've applied, and document any exceptions. So on that note, Isha, I want to say a massive thank you. This has been fantastic. We're right on the hour. I'm very proud to say that we actually managed to do this within the time allocated, which is great. But as you have said, from the outset, this is not a black and white process. Criminals are exploiting opacity. Regulators demand accountability. Investors and customers expect transparency. So UBO verification is not just about ticking a compliance box. It's about protecting the integrity, the resilience, and the sustainability of the global business of the financial institution. So on that note, Isha, I would like to thank you very, very much for your participation today. Is there any last comments or notes that you want to mention before we move on to Rory?
Thank you so very much, Una, for inviting me. It was a pleasure discussing about all of that, because daily into our line of business, we come across different businesses that suffer from all of these things. They have to pay major penalties from the regulators. There is reputational damage to their company. So I really hope in the future, like I said, it's not a black and white process. So I hope that we are able to come up with the technologies that can help all of us in a longer run. And but it was a really insightful session discussing about it and trying to know your insights about that as well. So thank you so very much for inviting me.
No, if I may say so, you did an incredible job. So thank you very much. Okie dokie. On that note, we are going to let Isha get back to her day. And next, we're going to be speaking to Rory Doyle from Finergo with regards to talent gaps within compliance frameworks globally in respect of particularly AI skill sets, and also what AI in compliance looks like in terms of future-proofing our industry. So if you just bear with us, we will be bringing Rory onto the stage.
Verifying a company's information manually isn't just tedious. Verifying a company's information manually isn't just tedious, it's risky. Imagine unknowingly partnering with a politically exposed person or someone on a sanctions list. Beyond frustrating CAPTCHAs and slow loading, government registries provide only basic details. No AML checks, no sanction insights, just fragmented data. Manually checking each owner's PEP status or sanctions history means hours of digging through multiple platforms, slow-loading registries, and incomplete reports. And even after all that effort, you're left wondering, have I missed something? Because even one overlooked detail can cost you everything. This is where others fall short, and where the KYB delivers. With the KYB, there's no guesswork. Every detail is right in front of you, organized, verified, and easy to access. Knowing who you're working with isn't optional, it's essential. The KYB makes it simple to identify PEPs and sanctioned individuals with just one click. While others leave you chasing data across platforms, the KYB gives you the answers instantly. Why waste time when you could be making informed decisions? Partnering without proper verification is a gamble. The KYB ensures you're always in the know. No extra clicks, no CAPTCHAs, no doubt.
Hello and welcome back. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of today's session, where we are joined by the esteemed Mr. Rory Doyle, who is head of financial crime policy at Fenergo. So Rory, by the way, loving the glasses. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, hi everyone. My name is Rory Doyle. As Una alluded, I'm head of financial crime policy at Fenergo. I've been with Fenergo now for 8 years. And before that, I've 25 years experience in MLRO roles and head of compliance roles in both the legal industry and in tier 1 financial institutions.
Thank you, Rory. Well, I'm actually really excited to have you here. Rory and I have been on a number of webinars together over the past number of years. And I'll be honest, they always manage to talk about the real challenges that we're facing. And it's one of the things that I really appreciate about you. You don't hold back on that. And today we're going to talk about 2 parts. We're going to talk about the global talent gap within compliance, and also, artificial intelligence in compliance moving forward and future-proofing kind of the business. I think it's fair to say that with the current expansion of AML and sanction scope and regulations, we are potentially outpacing supply in terms of experience and knowledge. And even in the EU, with the creation of the new AML package and the creation of AMLA, the European Anti-Money Laundering Authority, it's going to be hardening expectations and the harmonization of supervision across Europe, further lifting the bar. So there really is going to be a bottleneck in having the right skill sets and having the right experience in the market. So I'm going to pass it over to you before I kind of take away all of your responses myself.
No, far away. Carry on.
I'm just going to, you know me, Rory, I like to talk. We all do. I'd love you to talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in the market in respect of kind of demand versus supply.
Well, I think when we talk about supply, we need to talk about the fact that we're talking about an educated to supply, an experienced supply of AML professionals who have significant experience in whether it's in law firms, whether it's financial institutions, or over a number of years. As you alluded to, the AMLA is looking to expand the number of entities that require customer due diligence in an AML program. We saw in the last 2 weeks the publication of the new Tranche 2 reforms in Australia, which show a big increase in the number of firms that require a fin crime compliance team, to whether it's at onboarding or transaction monitoring, etc., etc. What we're also seeing is in the last 10 years an explosion of small to medium-sized fintechs, regtechs, fintechs and virtual currency exchanges. They all now require, obviously, an AML program, a fin crime program. That is causing a large requirement to staff up on these positions. But not only that, if we look geopolitically at this, where the world is now compared to where the world was 5 years ago, we see that there's a crisis in the Ukraine, crisis in the Middle East. There's issues obviously in China, between China and Taiwan, and then we also have a potential less synergy of a sanction programs between the United States and Europe. Because of this, more and more individuals have been sanctioned. So we've seen up to a 30% increase in the number of sanctioned individuals and entities in the last 5 years. And especially when we talk about the Ukrainian crisis, you are looking at individuals who actually have, financial interests within the Western financial systems. So they own property, they have security accounts, they have bank accounts, etc., etc. Whereas before, when we talked about sanction screening, in Europe and in America particularly, we were looking at individuals or entities who tended to have very little experience within the Western financial system. Now that these individuals who are sanctioned have their fingers in the West, you have to the account, you have to stop the account, you have to report the account, you have to re-review the account every year. You have to make sure that any issues around that have that you are on time with your sanction blocking. The amount of work required around an actual sanction hit and a false positive hit is exponentially bigger.
Yeah.
So we're looking at that. So you've got a perfect storm of extra regulations, extra firms, and a geopolitical situation which has caused a huge increase in the number and the number of people who are required to be on a sanctions team, for example.
One of the things that concerns me, and like yourself, having been an industry practitioner for a number of years, and I do see significant improvements happening, but was the lack of diversity and skill sets within compliance teams, and that has really began to change. But I remember when we first started, the thought of a police officer, stepping into a compliance role, it was basically really unheard of. Whereas we need that blend of skill sets of people with real on the ground investigator capabilities, and as you mentioned, sanction SMEs. We need now, with the move towards data, model risk validators, cross-border policy leads are scarce. Training cycles are long, laborious, and do they really do what they say on the tin? In most instances, no. So I completely agree with you. We have a perfect storm right now. And, what I'm also really concerned about is I do see a lot of people wanting and willing to try and upskill to understand, what AI, what artificial intelligence means for compliance. But you need a blend of regulatory experience and data science and money laundering ops and model governance to really understand. Look, we had Adam McLaughlin on yesterday, who you know very well, who's now your colleague at Fenergo. Claire, you guys have bombed it in the webinars we've done over the years.
Adam's lovely. Yeah. Really knows that stuff as well. So we're delighted to have him. He's going to be a huge asset for Fenergo.
Amazing guy. But one of the things he was saying yesterday is that it's not about finding the solution. The first point is understanding your problem statement. And what I'm seeing now is organizations are running head first towards, well, we need AI. It's the new buzzword. We need to demonstrate to the regulator. Even Wolfsburg last week, published in their most recent paper that we need to move away from rules and scenario transaction monitoring, which we all know, to more kind of behavioral analytics. And we absolutely do. But in order to achieve that, there's a massive data cleanup exercise required. And you then need to look holistically across your fragmented risk silos in order to understand, well, like, what multiple sources of the truth and data do we have? How do we get that data cleaned up? And then where is our biggest top and emerging risks within our organization? And based on that, what is the real problem statement we're trying to solve? And then what are the available solutions? And I don't think a lot of organizations have the right blend of skill sets to actually achieve that, in my own personal opinion at the moment. I don't know what you're seeing in the market, but from what I'm seeing is there's a run towards AI without, to Adam's point, asking, well, what actually is the problem we're trying to solve? And why is that the problem?
I think the problem that we're trying to solve, and, let's take a step back and talk about FATF. One of the first things that FATF did 15, 20 years ago and was brought through in the third money laundering directive while it was still a young man, was the theory was the theory of a risk-based approach. So if you look at what a risk-based approach is, it's saying that it doesn't matter if you're a tier 1 financial institution with 150 branches around the world, or you're, a credit union in Galway City. You have a finite amount of resources available to you to fight financial crime. Therefore, you should spend the majority of those resources on your higher areas of risk.
Yep.
So what we're trying to do in Fenergo is build artificial intelligence, agentic AI, that enables individuals to spend that time on their higher risk of business. And this is so important, especially now when we think about instant payments, T+1 settlements. There's not a case anymore that you can have, a backlog of items to go through. I mean, if you look at the FCA, if you look at the UK sanctions regulator, only this week has looked into a firm around the fact that that they had a couple-day backlog on their sanctions that resulted in an individual having being paid when they shouldn't be paid, and this is a problem that is central to why we believe agentic AI can assist firms in their regulatory responsibilities. It's not to replace individuals, it's to assist them, to make sure that they have time to concentrate on the areas that they need to concentrate on. They can do their investigations. They're not worried. I mean, one of the great examples I always give when I lecture on AML was when I was first starting in a sanctions team in a large institutional bank in Dublin, was that we had a very large UK client base, non-individuals, so corporates. And it was in the late 90s and early 2000s. And there was a gentleman from Liberia called Charles Taylor, a desperate despot who committed numerous crimes against humanity and was eventually brought to justice. But the problem was for me, and obviously it's a small problem compared to the issues in Liberia, was that when we did research on Charles Taylor, we found that there was 18,000 different Charles Taylors acting as directors within the UK. And therefore, every time a Charles Taylor came up as a director, we had to prove they weren't the Liberian dictator that the world was looking for. Which sounds easy, but it's back then it was quite difficult. So we're building systems that look and see, is there anything we can utilize to provide auto false positive reactions on your screening, so that you can actually look at the real issues, because it's not about our clients taking resources away from their compliance team. There isn't enough compliance professionals available worldwide to actually complete the work. Yeah. And you can't tell a regulator, I'm sorry, we just couldn't get the staff.
No, absolutely. And there's a couple of things I wanted to mention on that. I think the sanctions screening system not working for a few days, and then suddenly there being a hit. So you could also say it's bad luck, but this is why we need continuous sanction screening in payments, and that's the reason for it. But one of the things you mentioned there, goodness me, if I just mind my train of thought there, was about obviously the naming conventions. And I don't know if this stat still rings true, but I remember when I was working out in Asia there for 12 years, if you look at South Korea as a perfect example, something around 75 to 80% of the population have the same surname. So when it came to screening, it was a nightmare in terms of the amount, just to your example, the amount of hits that you would get on a single name, because of the fact that there is a standardized naming convention culturally. And so that makes things very, very challenging. it doesn't make it impossible, but as you rightly pointed out, it increases the workload significantly. And that's where having AI functionality to weed through the noise and basically put the right risks in front of the compliance officer, that really will make a difference in reducing the time spent in false positives. But to that point, and I don't know if you were able to see, or you had time earlier to see what Esha and I had been talking about, I still believe that many organizations don't actually do their risk assessments in the right way. And this came out of a really interesting conversation I actually had with Martin Nord, the CEO of Acumenor, the other week. And we both, he's, ex-Swedish police force, advisor to FATA-FM, working with Interpol. And we were talking about the kind of the inherent risks, the 7 pillars of inherent risk. And we collectively, and well, I should speak for myself here, I don't believe that the inherent risks within our business are fully understood when risk assessments are conducted. So when we're talking about false positives, etc., has the starting point for that risk assessment to identify where the risks are in our business really being foundational in the actual risks inherent versus, what are the mitigating controls versus what's the output? And I think that's one of our biggest challenges. There's a real lack of understanding third-party risk exposure, distribution channels, service channels, and most importantly, products and services. The amount of compliance professionals that I meet that can't explain to me in an elevator pitch what products and services they have still continues to concern me. And that is where I really believe we need to go back to basics in terms of skill sets, because from an AI perspective, the engineers are incredible. Like, they will be able to build whatever it is that we need based on our problem statement. But if we haven't fully articulated our problem statement because we don't actually fully understand our inherent risk, and as such, it hasn't actually been mitigated in the right way, i.e. we're getting all these false positives because we have a significant overpopulated number of high-risk customers, for example, it's kind of putting the cart before the horse. I know that's kind of going off track on our discussion today.
No.
But it concerns me, really concerns me.
I think you brought up a valid point. Risk assessments need, as I'm inferring from what you're talking about, need to be fluid. They need to react to real-time changes. And the very reason is that we know for a fact that professional money launderers are reverse engineering regulator guidelines, they're reverse engineering what FATF are telling everybody, and they know what some financial institutions are looking for in a risk assessment, and they're making sure when they make their application for that financial institution to be used as a conduit for money laundering, they are making sure that the information that they're providing is in line with what the financial institution wants to see. And, professional money launderers are as well funded as compliance departments in financial institutions, and especially as well funded as FIUs, which are, I sometimes feel very sorry for FIUs with the amount of staff I hear they have compared to the amount of work that they have to do. So, you've got to have a less prescriptive area of risk assessment, and your risk assessment needs to be fluid to the geopolitical situations of the time, what's happening on that particular day, to make sure that you're in line with what your regulator expects from you. And I suppose I can look to some positives, and if I look at the positives, I see from the National Crime Agency in the UK a large increase in the number of suspicious activity reports. If you look at FinCEN and OFAC, it's the same. If you look at the Philippines and you look at other regulators, we're seeing a large increase in the number of suspicious activity reports being made. Now, there can be two reasons for that, in my opinion. one, we're getting better at our job and we're identifying more, or B, there's more criminality in the world.
Yeah, you could have, but I think also that the financial crime typologies are evolving at a speed of light that we've never seen before. And also there's much more exposure in terms of people being impacted by illicit activity, money mules, investment scams, romance scams. Since COVID, they have quadrupled, if not more. Well, what was actually quite interesting, and this is a real positive for the FIUs and for the financial institution. And I kind of thought twice about whether I should say this in context of what you were saying, because I don't want people to think, oh, so was it worth it? And I mentioned earlier, I watched this Panorama episode last night about the drug cartels, kind of especially the fight that Ireland has on its hands at the moment in respect of drugs being moved up from LATAM and trying to use Ireland as a gateway into Europe for drug distribution, and what the Garda, law enforcement and the European, drug agency are doing to try and combat this. And what my takeaway from watching that is they are getting the information. The banks are doing their job. One example was, I talked about this earlier, a cargo ship which had been purchased for the purposes of moving the cocaine from LATAM, and then a fishing trawler had been purchased in West Ireland by a construction company out of the UAE, which makes no sense whatsoever. And that was the red flag. So clearly there was a bank involved there that submitted a SAR to the FIU, and it was immediately escalated so this whole investigation could happen. I was just like, wow, it's working. And that was, as a compliance officer watching this program, I was like, okay, so I know what's happened here. I can see that it's worked, it's been identified, a SAR has been raised, the FIU has done its job, it's been escalated to law enforcement. And what law enforcement, and in this case, they were successful and they apprehended, but what the law enforcement parties said and the European drug agency said was, we know and we see so much of where these movements are happening, but we're under-resourced at times to intercept them. So some of them we just have to let through because we don't have the resources. And I just thought to myself, damn it, so we're doing a good job. As you said about the increase in SARS, the right information is getting through to the right parties, to law enforcement in a timely manner to support investigations, and it's successful. But as a result, unfortunately, of lack of investment in helicopters and in kind of the infrastructure that we need to apprehend the criminals, that's not happening on the other side. So I didn't, and that's why I kind of thought, do I talk about this? Because it was showing that we are doing a good job on the SARS and the FIU is doing a great job. But this needs to be an ecosystem that works together so we can be successful, because otherwise what ends up is that the banks continually are the ones trying to fight the new channels that are being used by the bad actors, and we're constantly having to understand new typologies and new workflows, if that makes sense.
I couldn't agree more. And if you look at Singapore introduced roughly about a year ago their COSMIC initiative, which is a group of the largest banks in Singapore. Now, as you know, Singapore is a trade finance center of Southern Asia, and a great success story. And what they've been able to do is utilize artificial intelligence so that MAS, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and these large financial institutions can transfer information and understand when, a money launderer or somebody looking to finance terrorism is playing one bank off against another. They're able to recognize this. And this is why Article 75, the AML, of the AML regulation is so important. Public-private partnerships enabling, transfer of data quickly and efficiently between financial institutions and FIUs and regulators, so that they're all matched up and they're all talking in the same wavelength, so that you can identify when professional money launderers are using you as a conduit for money laundering. And that the quicker they can do that, the quicker they can find the trawlers, and they can have the information. And I suppose this is why artificial intelligence is so important within that chain of buying buying a trawler or leasing a transport boat. There is going to be invoices, there is going to be information, but that information now is being utilized by through AI to be falsified in a very, very professional manner. And the only way that we can fight artificial intelligence money laundering is by utilizing artificial intelligence to help the good actors fight the bad actors.
No, absolutely. I was smiling there because I have to say, not that I'm taking all credit for it, but I did actually raise this whole data sharing issue to Raluca a couple of years ago at actually one of the AML intelligence events. And Raluca is the head of the AML policy team at the Commission. And I asked her, what are we doing about this challenge that we have in data sharing, which the GDPR has actually created in terms of hindering investigations internally. And then she responded that she hadn't been aware about that, but she would take it back to the team and look into it. So I'm going to say that I kind of, in a way, feel that Article 75 is my baby, but I can't take full ownership for it. But
congratulations.
Thank you. You know what? I'm going to own it. Article 75, that was me. Thank you very much. But yeah, it was everybody's problem statement. But Singapore, yes, and you're absolutely right on the TBML side. And in fact, really interesting, and this is, I was laughing to myself as well, because in Singapore, they're quite particular about acronyms. So the Monetary Authority of Singapore, it's the MAS, but then people say MAS, it's like, it's not MAS. This happens like with AXA or AXA and stuff. It's a name, not an acronym. So what the MAS actually looked at doing was utilizing blockchain technology for trade-based, basically all types of trade transactions. Because as we know, and COVID was an eye-opener for us, there was so much manual paperwork still involved in trade. And to be fair, approximately 92% of financing for trade is actually done through open source financing, which means only 8% of that financing is actually regulated per se, i.e. provided by regulated entities. But what they wanted to do was see, could we utilize blockchain technology to make immutable the actual flow of documentation within the trade transaction itself, so their letters of credit, etc. So they brought together 10 banks in Singapore, and it was worked on. It was very successful. But what happened was, when it went then offshore, who was going to globally, it's kind of like was a SWIFT situation. SWIFT globally, supports kind of the kind of 100, 200, 300, whatever series messages in terms of transactions. So all of the relevant, fields in the document and the relevant information is captured within the message when the payments are made. But what we needed was an international party to oversee the application of the blockchain use case once it left the shores of Singapore. And that wasn't possible because there was nobody who had global oversight on that. So I've loved how the MAS has been exploring, in many ways, a utilization of technology use cases. And in some instances, the blockchain one sounded great on paper. It would work, but we would need a global entity to oversee it. But on Cosmic, information sharing is going to be a game changer. But if you take a step back, if you look at Singapore since 2013, 2014, they've had Strolls, which is the online STR, suspicious transaction reporting system. And they have actually been using AI technology from a very, very early stage to try and identify complex networks within that coming through and standardized FIU reporting. So, in my opinion, they're probably one of the most futuristic proofed STR, FIU platforms that you're going to see, because they started at early doors. And obviously AMLA now has a massive job on its hands to harmonize the FIUs across Europe and to bring a harmonization across a very fragmented and also different levels of knowledge and understanding, and also different countries, Latvia versus the UK. We're exposing ourselves. Latvia is, their number one risk is drug crime. Where in the UK, yes, drug crime is a big challenge, but also there's the risk of terrorist financing, which would be much more prevalent in another country than. So there is a significant job on the hands of AMLA, and they want to hire 700 people within the next 3 years to support this, and that's obviously going to have an impact on the FIs as well. Well, I suppose the question is, how deep is AMLA's pockets in order to compete against the FIs to get the right resources? And that's a different discussion. So on that note, I'm just conscious as well, we're halfway through our time. What skill sets do you think are the hardest to hire in the market at the moment, Rory?
Is experienced individuals who are willing to take the personal responsibility of being a money laundering reporting officer or a senior manager. We are seeing more and more. We at Fenergo, we do an annual fines report, and we do a mid-year fines report where we talk about enforcement actions and issues that have been prevalent within the industry over the past 12 or 6 months. And what we're seeing is a increase in the number of individuals who have experienced either a personal enforcement issue, so something on their watch has dropped the ball, and therefore they're being held accountable. We're also seeing an increase in the number of senior managers who end up, with a custodial sentence. So nobody goes to their job believing that wanting to go to prison. And I'm a huge believer in the personal responsibility aspect of MLROs and that. But because of that, we're seeing a lot more experienced financial professionals turning their backs on those positions because of how they feel either that financial institution's attitude to risk, and they may be more revenue orientated that they want to be, or that they should be, and therefore it's really difficult because, as you say, you don't go to work to go to prison, so you don't go to work to get personally fined. So that's the area we see a large disparity. And also, to be able to get to that point where somebody is looking for you to be an MLRO, you must have had the 15-20 years experience required.
I couldn't agree with you. I honestly, it brings me, and I do want to mention that point about accountability as well. There was a whole discussion about compliance officers and whether MLROs should actually have standalone insurance packages because of the accountability within the role. But it takes me back, and this is just a warning tale over the years, to your point. When you take up a role as an MLRO, the title sounds good, but what you have to remember is you're taking on board personal accountability and liability. And in all honesty, after those first 90 days, if you haven't got your hands fully around the risks that are in front of you, they become your risks and you own them. That those first 90 days, you're finding your feet, and you could argue, look, I'm just getting up skill. But after those first 3 months, they are your risks, and you own them. And one of the things that I remember back in the day, and I hope she won't mind me, I won't mention names, but I hope that she won't mind me mentioning this story, was I remember very, very early on in my career, and it must have been around 2006, I did my then SII, now CISI, investment and compliance examinations. And during that course, I met a friend, who we're still friends to this day. I can't believe this was 20 years ago. Oh God. And she was working at the time for a very, very reputable financial institution based in St. James's in Mayfair in London. And she was then the company secretary. And they'd said to her, on completion of this course, successful completion, they would like her to step in as as the CC, Chief Compliance Officer and MLR role. And I said to her at the time, are you sure that's something you want to do? If that's a really, do you really have the experience that's necessary to step into that role? I wouldn't have done it at that stage. I was only starting out in my career. And her response to me, and rightfully so on paper, was, look, you don't need to worry. I work for a really reputable firm. It's very well known. And that firm was Madoff Securities in Mayfair.
Right. Okay.
And within 6 months, she was sitting in front of the NCA, the FBI, the CIA, being investigated about the Ponzi scheme that had been uncovered within Madoff Securities, which, to be fair, only 3 people in the company actually, it turns out, were aware of. But that is what can, and again, would she have ever been aware of this? Well, this was about accountancy practices. So she would never, but that is the risk that you're taking on board, even if a reputable firm, you'd just be careful what you're walking into. But that was an instance where I don't think she would have ever been able to identify it herself either, because, she's not a forensic accountant. But anyway, be very careful what role and what title, because it looks good on paper, but make sure you're being compensated. But interestingly, if we look at what regulators are saying about resourcing and governance, the EU AML package, Rory, which you've already alluded to, the new 6 AMLD directive, obviously an AMLA starting up as well, they're emphasizing harmonization and effective supervision, which means that we all need to level up in respect of experience and knowledge. Then we have the Bank of England and the FCA talking about pro-innovation stances, but ensuring that senior management accountability and model governance and critical oversight of third parties is there. And then we have FATF, really focusing on encouragement of tech adoption, which I completely agree with, to improve effectiveness, and Wolfsburg, as I mentioned last week, but also whilst managing data quality, explainability, and privacy. And if you take all of that in its true kind of essence, what it's saying is you need to really understand what you're doing, understand the business. And it actually then makes me then think about the tiering levels within compliance teams. What should we, now be allowing? Should there be a prerequisite for an MLRO in terms of a specific qualification or indeed testing of the environment that they're stepping into before they can do that? Because that explainability is imperative to ensuring that you're getting the right data that's feeding your risk framework and your MI. And I'm concerned that there's a real lack of, yes, people are vetted before they go into controlled functions. But are we really doing enough to make sure they possess the necessary skills and experience? I don't know what your views are on that.
Well, the very essence of being an MRO is having personal responsibility. So if you don't have the personal responsibility to sit in your initial interview with the financial institution and grill them on their business risk assessment and make sure that you are comfortable with it's not about them hiring you, it's about you going into that role.
Yes.
So you're meant, the whole point of being an MLRO is you're personally responsible. So get some personal responsibility and work out, is the money worth it?
Absolutely. And to your point, Rory, 100% ask the right questions in your interview. You may not necessarily get the right answers, but understand why the predecessor is moving on. Understand, where they can disclose what they see as their biggest risks currently facing their business. Understand where they're evolving in terms of both investment in compliance, future-proofing the business, and their products and services evolution, and then kind of understand the current structure of the compliance team to see whether or not indeed that infrastructure is sufficient to support and manage not just short term but medium to longer term. And that's where then, if you do take the job, those first 90 days is micro analyzing the risk assessment, understanding how it was calculated, calibrated, who actually did it. Was it done internally or was it done by an external firm and then handed to you? How does that map to all of your existing controls? And do those controls mitigate the risk, or in some instances, are they just basically plasters covering over a wound or a gap? So that's something that I'm really, and we actually at Raw Compliance have a specific training course for MLROs on that. Like, how do you do this? Because I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and I stepped into an MLRO role many moons ago, and I didn't have access to this type of training. And I remember stepping into the role and then thinking to myself, what have I got myself into? We had to rebuild the entire GRC framework from scratch. And it was a incredible time for upskilling and personal development, but it was also a very daunting time in terms of the magnitude of responsibility that had just been taken on whilst BAU continued and decisions were having to be made, which, on client onboarding, etc., and sanction, screening, transaction monitoring, escalations, etc. Rory, I apologize. We've got literally 14 minutes left to talk about AI, which is probably one of the more kind of deep dive discussions you probably wanted to have. But we have actually got capacity to run over should we need to. So, because I want to make sure you get the most out of this conversation. So, where at this moment can AI most credibly bridge the gaps that we are currently seeing?
Firstly, I'm going to have to say something about AI. If you are a financial institution and you have decided to go down the route of having an agentic AI policy, and we're seeing, the vast majority of financial institutions in our when we do surveys looking to install AI into their framework, you have to understand some factors. The first factor you have to understand is if you put bad data into a very good system, you're going to get bad data out.
Yep.
Having a clean data input system is crucial to being able to utilize AI to stem the any resourcing issues you have from that we talked about earlier in the show. Also, one of the things that we provide in Fenergo is we have a centralized client lifecycle management and transaction monitoring system. So we are able to centralize data both at a transaction level and at a client level, which enables us to make sure that we can provide the AI systems that a client needs to exercise their needs.
So I do apologize if you hear some snoring. It's actually it's my dog, and I can't seem to wake him up. So it's very low. So if you do hear snoring, I do apologize.
I'm going to bring it back to what we talked about earlier. We feel that the AI agents that we produce enable compliance professionals do the work on a risk-based approach and be able to concentrate on the higher risk areas of their support. So we have a data sourcing agent, for example, that helps bring in information from third-party providers and make sure that the information is consistent, because there is differentials between various data sourcing agents on information being provided.
Absolutely.
We have one of our good sellers or great sellers is around a screening agent, the ability to identify false positives, the ability to understand if a PEP is a material PEP association or not is crucial in giving you an up-to-date list that when you walk in, you can see exactly what cases you need to examine today and what cases have already been auto-completed. We have a document agent, which is one of the best features that I see. We are able to ingest items like the Wolfsburg questionnaire for a correspondent banking relationship, ingest every single piece of information created in that, verify it, and be able to risk assess your correspondent banking relationship with that respondent bank compared to others. And therefore, what you're doing is providing an enhanced due diligence process, but in a quick and efficient and compliant manner.
Absolutely. That's really well said. I think, really where credibly we're seeing that building of the bridges is KYC refresh and remediation. As you said, auto collecting, validating documents, changes since last review, dynamic risk rescoring, just continuous ongoing rescoring, and based on multiple factors which impact obviously the risk rating of the client. Screening optimization, reduction of false positives, thankfully, transaction monitoring, triage, and case summarization. That has been, for me, I've really been so excited to see how we've managed to generate better investigator briefs and prioritize alerts through better triage within the transaction monitoring systems, and obviously adverse media and NLP. Really, that has been a big game changer. And also, I suppose you mentioned there as well, of course. Interestingly, actually, just on that correspondent banking questionnaire, we actually took that and repackaged it for the onboarding for crypto firms, for the onboarding of crypto firms. Just as an FYI, that's so whenever people are asking how do I do due diligence for onboarding a crypto firm, and it's like, well, why not just use the correspondent banking questionnaire from Wolfsburg that's already in place, and then just kind of restructure it. So that's how that came about. But I think really importantly, AI is never going to replace, never. It will replace certain ongoing repetitive roles. But it's more of an augmentation tool than a replacement tool. It accelerates, searches, summarizations, patterning, review of alerts to bring it down to really what we need to look at. But the materiality of judgments and accountability and proportionality, which the regulators expect to see, would you agree that that's still going to sit with the human at the table?
100%. I don't want to be flippant, but you can't put a chatbot in prison.
Yeah.
Somebody has. We spent 15 minutes talking about personal responsibility here, so it's an individual who will be, or a senior management or a board of directors who will be responsible for the AML program. All AI is doing is assisting in the fact that there's more business being put through. The business that's being put through is now instant and is not, queues are unacceptable. There isn't the talent available, the experienced talent available to do the more mundane bits of work that are required. There are more financial firms around the world. There's more financial regulation around the world. And even if we talk, I've been talking to some of our Australian clients and our Australian prospects around the implementation of the AML reforms in next year in Australia. And the reason that Australia came up with a new AML regime is around the simplification of the AML process, or in Europe around a harmonization. All this simplifies the AML work, but it's actually created more work at the beginning of the effort, because you now have to change your processes. You have to take away things, you have to add things, you have to risk assess in a slightly different manner. So all these areas are causing such we talk about a talent gap. It's causing a large amount of resource problems at a compliance department level.
Did you happen to see the I don't know, it's kind of a slight kind of detour from kind of the AI discussion, but sorry, you continue there, Rory.
No, you go ahead. No, go ahead.
It was actually just about a really, really interesting piece of research that came out of the University of Amsterdam. I think it was last week or the week before, where they actually were using, and this was about kind of how we're using chatbots in order to streamline workflows. So they actually used 500 chatbots, and each one of these chatbots was given a distinct persona and basically age, ideology, income. And what actually happened was that the chatbots began to cluster into political cliques and with extreme viewpoints and visibility. And they actually then began to create elite influencer bots within each of the subsections, where they began to start displaying leadership and team behavior. And they tried intervention within this to try and see if they could remove the user bios or amplify opposing views. But there just continued to be a tendency towards polarization and elite dominance, which was rooted into the network architecture itself. And why? Because of human bias whenever it was being created, because we're a hierarchical society. And it was really, really interesting, actually, because it was just about training AI bots, and the bots themselves actually then begin to display a dominance of hierarchy. So there you go. Interesting report.
It has to be said that the intelligence that artificial intelligence is gleaming from is from the internet, and the internet is by and large biased.
Yeah. And it was also, a lot of it was led by social media, and this was actually a very interesting point. Social media at its core is intended to be antagonistic and provocative, and that's where the learning was being pulled from. And as a result of that, the bot itself was, as I mentioned, kind of they became an influencer, a leader within each of like the bot, the kind of networks that basically clustered together. So it was actually quite that social dynamics, not just algorithms, were actually driving kind of unequal behaviors. But it's really honestly, I just find it incredibly interesting at the moment. So
I think
so go ahead.
there should be a move away when we talk about artificial intelligence, a move away from when we look at AML and fin crime. Personality shouldn't be an issue. We have a chatbot within our system, and you can talk to the chatbot, but what the chatbot does is brings back reports for you in advanced reporting. So tell me all the high risk clients that we took on in the last 6 months. Show me what PEPs we have to review in the next 3 months, that type of thing. Like, inherently biased artificial intelligence is a danger, and you must, in your business risk assessment, if you're taking on AI, which the vast majority of financial institutions need to have some form of AI policy that makes sure that all these biases are mitigated.
And to that point, Rory, and somebody had mentioned this to me a number of weeks ago, and I actually thought it was a really, really good point. And forgive me for not being able to remember who it was. It's a sign of my age. Having a kind of a chief AI officer within a larger organization that's actually overseeing all of the AI development and deployment, to that very point, so they can ensure that the right bias and unfair outcomes, data skewers, selection bias, etc., is removed through best practice within the organizations. I thought that was a really interesting hire within organizations, having a chief AI officer who basically, and I think that's even outside of the role of a CTO. The CTO is focused on the technology, but somebody who independently is ensuring that rollout is removing data skews and selection bias.
Not only that, Una, if you think about that idea, at some stage, you are going to be subject to a regulatory inspection. Now, whether that's the Central Bank of Ireland or the FCA, and they're going to sit down and they're going to say, okay, show me your policies and procedures. Okay, I see you utilize AI in your transaction monitoring, or you use AI in your identification, or you use AI in your false positive manner.
Yep.
Explain how that happens to me.
Yep.
How that works. If you cannot explain to the regulator how your artificial intelligence systems works, you are in for a bad inspection.
Yeah, if you have a black box model, guys, forget about it. Explainability and auditability gaps is your biggest threat. And we're even seeing that, and even putting aside AI, going back to skill sets, we're even seeing that in regulatory applications for approval, especially in the kind of the crypto space and the fintech space. You know, the MLROs are being asked to explain the application of transaction monitoring. Why did you select these transaction monitoring tools? And so how they've been applied, how have you calibrated the systems, and what was the basis for that calibration? And if at any point in time your response is, well, we kind of just bought it like that, or this was recommended to us, you are dead in the water. Their explainability aligned to your inherent versus mitigated risks is 101. So but back to knowledge.
Regulators are on the same journey as financial institutions. They are learning day by day what artificial intelligence can do, how it can assist in the fight against financial crime. It's, you know, at the beginning of this journey, we found there was slight trepidation around artificial intelligence because they thought it would take away resources. They thought it was going to be a factor around there. We don't believe that's the case. In the 1970s, they invented the personal calculator, and when they invented the personal calculator, that they thought there was going to be half the accountants in the UK would be made unemployed. That never happened. All that happened was that the accountants were able to do their job more efficiently, quicker, and do more work.
I just laughed there. I don't know why, but especially in Singapore, every time the guy moved to a new role, they would give you a new calculator. So I wouldn't say I had that many roles, but I have an entire drawer full of calculators. Anyway, so I've got if anybody ever needs a calculator, just give me a call if you can't find one. But back to the kind of the key risks, over automation risk. You know, this, as you're developing and rolling out and enhancing automation, there is a risk of over automation where you've got unchecked auto decisions. And that's something which is so critical as well. And that goes back to the explainability. And this also goes back to what we continually see in remediation exercises of whether it's regulatory or audit findings. And we're very quick to bridge a gap and say, oh, actually, we could automate that gap. But do make sure, I always call it the domino effect, or chess. Compliance is like a game of chess, and the controls are like a game of chess. You need to think at least 2 moves ahead in order to understand, like, what is going to be the knock-on impact of this change that I make, and how, and always bring it back holistically. Anytime you're going to change even a small part of a control process, take a step back and actually ask the bigger question: why are we doing this? What is the expected outcome? And also, why are we doing it this way? And actually, how could we be doing this better and actually might make this more effective? So just automating and continuing to automate is a very, very dangerous process if you're not holistically looking at the bigger picture of, well, why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? And also making sure that you are checking the auto decisions that are being automated as well.
I think that's why business risk assessments are so crucial.
Yeah,
so crucial. And I'm sure when it comes to country risk assessments, when FATF visit various jurisdictions, they're talking about what is your regulator's AML policy, AI policy when it comes to financial crime. How are you doing it? Let's see. I'm sure AMLA will be talking to the regulators that are now coming under their jurisdiction around what their AI policies are, how they are upskilling their inspectors to make sure they know to ask the right questions when it comes to looking at what mitigating circumstances and what testing a financial institution is doing of its AI systems to make sure that AI is being what it's set out to be, which is an assistant to your financial crime policy. It will help, it will identify issues, it will stop you being used as a conduit for money laundering.
Absolutely. We actually published a paper there the other day, a thought leadership, on this very point about the comparative analysis between Hong Kong, Singapore, the kind of the UK, US, and also Europe in terms of AI regulation, and where we see the challenges. And the thing is, AI, it's a global ecosystem, and I'm continually concerned about fragmented regulatory adoption because of the fact that AI doesn't have borders, and it's something which really needs much more guidance at a global level. And I'm maybe hoping in the financial crime space that potentially FATF will lift up the gauntlet on this one, which I expect them to do. But in the financial crime space, the fragmentation in a global ecosystem of AI is very difficult, because you implement an AI structure in one location which may be inoperable or have incompatibility with another jurisdiction due to AI limitations within the regulatory framework. So again, this will all iron itself out over time, but there are a lot of imbalances currently. And that then obviously, last but not least, brings us back to governance as well. Weak governance models. We've talked about oversight, of having somebody overseeing it, but we need to make sure that there are solid governance practices within the AI use case itself, such as, SR 11.7 or OCC 2011, 2012 expectations. So governance is critical. But Roy, I'm just conscious, do you have much time left, or do we need to wrap it up now, or do you still have another 5-10 minutes?
No, I think we're, unfortunately, I've got a previous engagement.
Perfect. Okay. Well, then on that note, just before we finish up, looking ahead, let's kind of look at a 5-year kind of plan, the 2030 vision, AI first, human verified compliance. Do you, future-proofing training, vendor oversight, validation, change control? Would you mind kind of just giving me an idea of what you think both operations, architecture, and regulatory posture may look like in the next 5 years?
I think within 5 years we're going to see a expansion because of the availability of artificial intelligence and its uses, and how successful it's been in the Cosmic Initiative in Singapore, how successful I believe it's going to be with Article 75 around taking a public-private partnership. I would be looking either for FATF or the G20 to be taking a role in actually building an Article 75 on a global scale. So we're able to ingest information around, a cargo ship in Australia sailing on to Chile, sailing on to the EU, and why did it stop off in Chile, etc., and bringing those financial points together, and being able to process all that information, and being able to give a succinct reasoning to investigators or to MLROs or to compliance officers around why we believe this is a threat to your financial institution.
Absolutely. And then obviously just then bringing together like the shipping one as well, the tools in the market like Windward, etc., where they're actually looking at, whether or not GPS, there has been blackouts within that period of time. Where could that ship have gone? What other ships were nearby? Flag hopping, etc. So there's still so much to unpick, Rory, and I know you have to jump, but I want to thank you so much indeed for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to see you once again. Loving the new glasses.
Oh, thank you.
They're very Dutch, if I may say. Dutch people always have more colorful glasses. So really wonderful to see you. Wish you all the best. Congratulations with Adam joining the team as well. And again, thank you for joining us today. And thank you to all of our attendees today once again for tuning in. But don't worry, it's not the last day. We've got day 3 tomorrow coming up. So please do make sure you register for tomorrow. But on that note, Rory, thank you so much to all of our listeners and our guests today. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful, wonderful day ahead.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.
Bye now. Bye all.